So I have to couch all of this with, I am a steely-eyed storage guy, and so I don't believe any of it. And they said, why don't you come up here and ask these people questions about real-time implementations of software-defined data centers, which leads me to, first of all, could you all introduce yourselves? And then let me say, I don't believe there is such a thing as a working software-defined data center today, but that's a maturity question. So we can start with just total animosity and move on from there.
Goes uphill.
So we'll start at the far end.
Hi, I'm Dave Meyer from Rotate.
Dave Wright with SolidFire.
I'm Victoria Gray with GridStore.
Jesse St. Laurent with Simplivity.
Mike Letschin with Nexenta.
Aditya Vempaty with Coho Data.
It works down here.
I was worried. I can scream. Won't be a problem.
So I really do have difficulty because we've got from our previous presenters this marvelous milk and honey concept of a software-defined data center, and everything operates in order to support the applications. And then I go in the real world. And then I listen to your erstwhile competitors saying that this device that we sold 6 years ago is now software-defined storage. And so I remain somewhat confused. But since we're supposed to be talking about the real world, I'm going to start with Dave. I go, how far has the real world really gotten?
Which
Short yet far end, Dave.
Dave's not here? No. Gotta try.
Yeah. Sorry, the rim shot machine's broken.
Yeah, right. Well, so I think let me preface my comment by saying I think progress in the software-defined data center world is coming rapidly, but right now, my view of it is it's very componentized, right? So we have all kinds of components. Like, one of the ones that I work on is Open Daylight, and how does Open Daylight fit in here? It itself is a component of the software-defined data center, but the way that it interoperates, say, with OpenStack and with storage infrastructure isn't really nailed down yet. So in a lot of ways, my sense of the software-defined data center concept is it's getting more well-defined. I think one of the talks we had earlier in the last session kind of went over this, but things are evolving rapidly, but I would say it's not fully baked, I guess is the way I would say it.
Yeah, unfortunately that seems to be my response too. But Dave works with the leading edge.
Yes, we do. So, look, I think that the reality is that the software-defined data center is aspirational to a certain extent. It is a journey that we are on. Like I said, as far as I'm concerned, it started 10 years ago with virtualization as the first leg of the software-defined data center. Software-defined networking really only became a thing 2 or 3 years ago, and suddenly got amplified with VMware's Nicira acquisition. And software-defined storage just seemed to be the inevitable third thing that everyone would throw in the pile. But the reality is that we've had a lot of the motion underway in the storage side of things to enable some of these kind of software-defined provisioning, management, orchestration things for a while now as well. And so, while this model is aspirational and these elements are at different stages of maturity, we are seeing real customers doing very real things with these. And particularly on the service provider side with OpenStack, they are able to use this framework to take a huge pool of resources, compute, networking, storage, carve them up, provision them out to their customers, or in many cases give customers a pool of resources that they can then carve up and provision for their applications using APIs. We have customers like Internap and iWeb that are using OpenStack to do that today, and it's transformed their business. The ability to give their customer bases, Amazon-style self-service capability on a very, very rich and evolving platform is transformational. Their time to provision a virtual machine, their time to provision a server, has gone from hours or days down to minutes that a customer can.
I can buy the orchestration part. It's like, yeah, that's probably the first piece we had to do, and I can buy that, and I can buy that at scale. But Victoria and Jesse aren't selling into 10,000 server hyperscale data centers. what's this mean for the guy on the street?
Well, I'll actually key on what we just heard about certain market segments that I think are moving towards this architecture faster than others. And one of the ones that we see is the service providers. So similar. They seem to be leading the way. And many of them are not the huge service providers, but maybe smaller ones. And we see quite a mix. So we've got service providers like UNG out of South Carolina, Fion out of Ontario. Their customer base themselves are small businesses, and like the example of UNG, are offering to the medical market outsourced IT services, and they have rapidly adopted a software-defined data center in order to deliver at scale and affordability that meets their needs. So another one for us, another service provider, but much larger and doubling in size almost every year, is Virtucom out of Denver. So there's a case of a much larger deployment that actually moved into the Hyper-V environment in order to have both the manageability and the scale and the affordability that they needed, and the whole software-defined architecture helped them to get to deliver the SLAs that they needed for their customer base, but at a cost point and a scalability that met their needs.
Okay, Jesse?
So how many people here are service providers? All right, so I want to talk about our service provider customers. So my guess is most folks here would categorize themselves either as mid-market or enterprise customers. Is that reasonably accurate?
Or how many of you would identify yourselves as being part of the supply as opposed to the consumption side of IT? Yeah.
Okay.
We're talking to ourselves.
So supply, again, though, supply
There could be people watching.
Yes, but they can't raise their hands over the internet.
That is true.
They could poke
So let me step away from the service providers for a minute, because I think it's an interesting market to talk about, but it's actually less applicable for probably most folks sitting here. So I think there's the theory of the software-defined data center and being able to have this magical vision where, what was it called, Milk and Honey? Was that your...
But life is beautiful all the time.
Right, exactly. Lake Wobegon, where everyone's above average. So I think the reality is what we're seeing in enterprise customers and mid-market customers is if you can deliver something that allows the customer to assign a policy to a virtual machine, protect the virtual machine both locally and remotely, and never have to configure any of their infrastructure, right? As far as that customer is concerned, that might as well be software-defined infrastructure, software-defined data center, software-defined whatever, right? The application of a policy to a VM that efficiently protects that VM in the local data center or remote data center to the cloud and makes it mobile to move between them, right? Isn't that practically software-defined infrastructure for most mid-market companies?
No.
So I think for us, we're seeing it not just, service providers are one section, but it seems to be application-based as well. Mm-hmm. It's not that you're looking at the entire data center, so maybe you're looking specifically at VDI or specifically at the Exchange or a database section. Where how can each one be? Because people aren't saying, I'm going to revamp my whole data center.
Sorry, pardon me for interrupting. Oh, actually, that's my job, so I'm going to interrupt.
It's fair.
But are you really seeing, my impression is that we're seeing this, kind of in parallel with DevOps, that what we're really seeing is that DevOps group is building a private cloud software-defined data center for what they're doing. You're saying you're really seeing that for what we used to call shrink wrap applications before they stopped actually using shrink wrap?
Yeah, we're seeing it where, and the DevOps is a good example. We've had some environments where, in the automation side of things, with Chef and Puppet, it's the reason why we spent time on making sure that we had Chef and Puppet clients for an Exenta store, so that those same users could use that. Mm-hmm. But also when you get into, like I said, VDI is the best example we've seen where it's become there was the issue of from one side to the next. It needed to be you decided I have this application, these are my requirements, now how do I define that on the networking side, how do I define that on the storage side, and how do I define that on the compute versus the other way around? I
understand where you're going. But I could argue that that's exactly the opposite of what we'll have one self-managing, self-aware Skynet run our data center that several of the other folks today have been talking about, because what you're really saying is we're going to take VDI, we're going to make it an island, which is the general recommendation for VDI because it is so different than everything else that we do. And to make it an island with traditional enterprise devices, given the reliability requirements of the desktop, would be ridiculously expensive, so we have a third way.
Well, and I think that's where that automation comes into play. I don't have to use something separate, but automated so I pull the pieces of that are needed. Right. So maybe I have a flash array and a hybrid array, whatever they are, but in front of that, I'm putting that layer of, now pull piece for this, piece for this. Maybe I have a full-fledged array and I just need a little bit more write cache for my desktop, so I need that side of it. Get that flow, and that's where we're starting to see more and more that it becomes defined by the application just as much as it is whatever that software is the application at that point.
Right.
So
and you guys.
I know, the last weird people, right?
Well, I mean, you have integrated storage and software-defined networking, and that's a good thing, but you've shipped like 4 boxes, so real world, really?
We do have a few real-world workloads. I mean, we do have some named Overwatch as well as Saka, which is a managed service provider. But I think the biggest thing, as Jesse touched on, I forgot your name, sorry. Mike touched on, is it's eventually the applications, right? I mean, the applications are the ones demanding these workloads, these performances. And with software-defined data center, you can allocate resources, but really bigger than that, what software-defined data center allowed us to do is give context to your data through the entire stack. It's just not about saying storage QoS this way, networking this way, servers this way. If you did it right and you can orchestrate through the entire stack, your application's QoS can be automated at the VM level and carry out through the networking, carry out through the storage. And I mean, that's what we like to say is what we've really done by integrating the storage with the networking, is we achieve the QoS through the stack, but we allow you to orchestrate it at the VM level. And I think that's what software-defined networking really is the ability to associate context to the data coming out of your applications, not just at one level, but through the entire stack. That's what it really enables you to do. And I think that's what we're all striving towards, allowing us to do that.
Yeah. It would be nice in vCenter for me to just pick a VM and go, this is a mission-critical VM.
Yeah, and that's not a storage
Make sure
profile,
that it, well, no, I don't even want to do that. I want to say, this is a mission-critical VM, and whenever there's contention for CPU, it should win, and whenever there's contention for memory, it should win, and whenever there's contention for network, it should win, and whenever there's contention for storage, it should win, because I got 4 levels, and this is my top level. Unfortunately, we're at least 3-4 weeks away from that.
Just 3-4 weeks, huh?
So you know, based on that, let's see, optimistic projection, what's the biggest hurdle between where we are now, where we're kind of virtualized and we're kind of orchestrated, to that software-defined data center? And you know, who are where is it that we need to make that biggest change? And of course, it's going to be different for different customers. So you know, if I was a huge, if I had 10,000 physical servers running virtual workloads, yeah, I really need SDN. But where else do you see, where are the disconnects? Because
it's the human part of it.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's the end user.
End user, he's got to trust that this will actually deploy the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, my fellow steely-eyed storage guys, we're going to take a long time. We're a conservative bunch.
I think that's why service providers are first. Service providers a lot of times have the talent of guys that are willing to dig into it, and they're able to do it first. So when you get into the enterprise space, you get less and less of the admins and that human factor that know how to do it or are comfortable doing it and changing the way they have to do things. They're used to doing it this way. And nobody got fired for doing it that way, so they're going to keep doing it that way.
Yeah, when you're Amazon or Google, you can hire PhDs to figure out how to optimize your data center.
Right.
But if you're Amazon and you're Google, you're also not emotional about any application you're running. For application.
They're emotional.
We're not emotional about it. We're emotional about it.
They're emotional. You just don't see the emotions.
But if you're, I think a huge impact of this is a huge impact here is the application, right? So is the application ready to run within that type of infrastructure? Is the infrastructure ready? But then is the application ready? And then is the administrator willing to jump headfirst into the deep end of the pool and say, just egg, right? Do it for
the application will be ready if the admin says it's going to be ready. I'm going to force this to go down this road.
Well,
and solve all the issues that come along with the way.
That's not the administrator. That's the developer.
Is Oracle? Are you going to do that with Oracle?
If you want, I've seen Oracle virtualized, right?
Sure, but there's a big difference between virtualization and software-defined, right? So I think there's a big leap between taking these off-the-shelf shrink-wrapped apps that aren't shrink-wrapped anymore, and saying, yes, they're software-defined.
But I'm saying you have to go down that journey to get there. You have to take the risk to eventually get there. Otherwise, you'll never take that risk and never get there.
Or you rewrite the app.
There's probably some middle ground, too, where a benefit can be derived even in the case where you have that shrink-wrapped stuff, because you have much more agility in the infrastructure. You can optimize it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the vast majority of enterprises we see deploying something that looks or smells like a software-defined data center, it is not for the purpose of replacing their existing infrastructure. It is for a new initiative. It is for a new data center rollout. It is for a next-generation data center offering that some of the old stuff may migrate into, some of the old stuff will die off, some of the old stuff may get outsourced to an outsourcer because it's gotten so nasty that they don't even want to think about it anymore. But by and large, those new things are being driven by either two things. One is project-driven, where there is an initiative that they have to deploy some kind of application. Maybe it's something big data related, maybe it's VDI related, something where they can either stand up yet another silo of specialized application infrastructure for that, or they can say, you know what, maybe it's time to move to a more flexible infrastructure where I can use this project as my excuse to actually roll out software-defined networking, roll out scale-out storage, roll out, in some cases still virtualization into this use case. And now I have a platform that I can start slotting other use cases into. And now I have an agile infrastructure that allows me to react more quickly without every time a new request comes in going through a 6-month cycle to evaluate new kind of storage and networking, compute, and different boxes to figure out how to put this together, because now I actually have a pooled resource model that I can slot that in, give it the resources it needs and goes. And that's how we see these things coming in. It's not a rip and replace.
To be completely cynical, and if the project fails, I can use this for something else.
Well, I think it depends on the perspective of the customer as well. I mean, most of them have gone down that virtualization route now, so that's a good background to deploy software-defined data center, right? Because you've got that part of the experience, and then as we heard earlier in the day, the infrastructure guys might think about it on a per VM basis, and the application guys are think about it on an application basis. But honestly, since I'm in the job of marketing, one of the challenges I think we have as an industry is most of our customers don't yet go, let me just Google that software-defined data center and see how I can get one of them. So, I mean, I do think it's an issue. I think that everybody who's here is probably fairly forward-looking in thinking about these issues and putting them into the slot of, software-defined data center, software-defined networking, software-defined storage is going to help me to solve this problem. So in fact, we have to get better with connecting those real-world cases in a way that people who are managing, say, at the VM level in a Hyper-V environment can understand it and get the benefits of it. And I think that's still a challenge. Along with the fact that the architecture isn't really there yet, for the most part, end-to-end.
But it is a challenge because I think the industry is very used to selling very specific Band-Aids for particular problems. And in the storage world, it's usually performance. Your Oracle database needs to be faster. Here's a Band-Aid. We're going to make that Oracle database run faster.
Either that or you have 27 petabytes and it's just scale.
Exactly.
And they're, we're outside this discussion.
Well, and also throw storage at it. Throw storage at it is a classic answer, right? And that's what we're trying to remake here.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about, look, the software-defined data center isn't about a Band-Aid to fix one particular problem. It is about a better way to orchestrate, manage, and scale your infrastructure because it's going to keep growing.
Well, isn't it a Band-Aid to limited agility?
Yeah, well, it is. But the problem is most people take Band-Aids to fix their limited agility, right? They don't have agility, so they have a Band-Aid here and a Band-Aid here.
And it's not a Band-Aid because we're designing it in.
No, exactly. This is the long-term fix for it. It's not the Band-Aid, and it's not a quick fix.
Oh, well, it's just hard to see this. I mean, I was just thinking about what you said, and I was thinking about what everybody was saying. And one of the things I find interesting about this discussion is it seems like the idea of software-defined data center, what it is fully defined. And in reality, that's not the case.
Yeah.
I mean, the way we're talking about it is, you do some orchestration, you have some software-defined networking, software-defined this and that, virtualization.
Well,
but the thing is, the software-defined data center or software-defined networking has actually got to be a platform for evolution of that service itself as well. Otherwise, it's going to fail, right?
Yeah, and we've reached the point where we know what the definitions of all the building blocks are, but we don't actually know how the building blocks should be implemented, and we won't till we try them a couple of times and fail and learn from it. Oh, and we still have 25 minutes left. This is what I get for not preparing. So, one of my problems with a lot of the conversation that I hear, from my fellow members of the pundit class is that we should run our data centers more like Google and Facebook run their data centers. And I don't agree at all. For various reasons that, since I'm not actually here speaking, I won't go into in detail. But, Dave, you've already mentioned we shouldn't be looking more like Google and Facebook. We should be looking more like Rackspace
and Amazon.
And Amazon.
We agree with that.
So what are the lessons, and how do we take those techniques and move them into the corporate data center, because those guys hire PhDs to figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. And then because they had really smart guys figuring out what to do, what they do is systematized. The corporate world doesn't hire computer science PhDs. We outsource that. We buy products designed by computer science PhDs. How do we take the concept and move it into the corporate data center without requiring that personnel change as well?
Yeah. So that's it's a great distinction to draw there. You asked the question, should enterprises build their data centers like Facebook or Google? And the answer is, well, not until they start building their applications like Facebook and Google, which they're not necessarily doing yet. But there are places where technologies from those companies are making their way into the enterprise. Think about Hadoop, MapReduce. Where did that come from? Google. Right. Think about Cassandra, MongoDB. Where do those technology companies? Those came from the web scale companies. And those are starting to be adopted by enterprises, by enterprise developers for their internal applications and use cases. And as particularly those applications get developed, and as those use cases become more and more important in the enterprise's world, then the enterprise can start thinking about, or in many cases will be forced to start thinking about their infrastructure in more of a hyperscale model, or they might just mail it in and decide to run those applications in the cloud, which a lot of them are doing.
I think you have to tier the market as well. So we talk about the extreme end, you have the Googles and Amazons who are hiring computer science talent. If you look on Wall Street, you have the same phenomenon, right? The financials are hiring very talented folks. And you have the capabilities of a DevOps team who truly does have in-depth software development expertise as part of those teams. As you start to come down market, you can call the team whatever you want, but you start to lose the computer science depth and the technical capabilities of those teams. And this is where I think reality has to...
It's not even just down market, it's cross market too. Fidelity and Goldman have those guys. General Motors doesn't.
Right, and I think what you need to find somewhere in there is technology that enables them to get someone had a slide earlier, I don't remember who had it, that said disappointment's the difference between what we anticipated and reality, right, or something like that. I think there needs to be technology that allows people without those high-end computer science skill sets on their team to be able to deliver what they anticipated getting from a software-defined infrastructure without needing all the complexity that comes with that. I mean, I don't make it a sales pitch. That's the objective of SimpliVity as a company, which is to enable someone who does not have the DevOps team and who doesn't understand all of this complexity to basically get what they anticipate getting from that.
I just wanted to mention that it's true that not everybody has a team of PhDs, but at one time it was true that only Len Kleinrock knew what queuing theory was, and now, well, not now, but you'd open a socket and you get TCP, right? I mean, and you didn't, you didn't write 3 volumes on queuing theory, but
no, we have to simplify it to the point where
that's one thing, and then the second thing is that some of the stuff is new, is what I'm trying to say. Eventually,
some.
Yeah, and then the second thing is that there's a combination of things going on. One, somebody mentioned this DevOps, right? So not all networking people are DevOps people, obviously, and that's a huge issue, right?
Well, not all organizations have DevOps at all.
Right? Yeah, and then in conjunction with all of those things is the fact that everything is going faster now because it's software, and because the barriers to entry are so low, and because there are skill sets out there that can build these things. So we've never actually seen this combination of things, at least in the last 25 years.
I will challenge that. And I will say that having led the PC revolution, that we are seeing echoes. That the whole pirate IT, I'll just put it up on AWS, is almost exactly the same thing as IT can't deliver my application in 9 months, so I'm going to buy a PC and write a macro in Lotus 1, 2, 3. It is somewhat accelerated, but there is an echo of how PCs came in as rogue projects. I mean, I remember selling PCs to Citibank and the purchase order saying office equipment. Because the guy who was writing the PO was allowed to buy typewriters, but he wasn't allowed to buy computers, only IT could buy computers. And so we sold PCs and they said, we're processors. And then they ran Lotus 1, 2, 3 on them.
Sure. The way I'll summarize it is, I think things are really accelerating right now. I think that skill sets are very skewed right now. And that's the whole DevOps versus whatever. And the third thing is that because things are moving so fast, everything's evolving at a great rate.
Yeah.
Right? So even if you have expertise,
last year's expertise is not.
It basically times out pretty quickly. So you have to, that kind of combination of things, I think is what's causing a lot of what we're seeing right now.
Okay.
There's a question in the back.
Well, before we move to the question in the back, the guys at this end of the table I've been
Ignoring?
Well, I was going to say shutting up, but ignoring is more polite. Thank you.
We have a question from
scale. Oh. Like you said, the mention of going Facebook or Google, they're putting a whole rack in. These developers or a whole data center.
At the same
like
time.
their whole plan was these CS guys are trying to figure out how do I combine everything. It's not how do I do this piece, this piece, this piece. An enterprise isn't buying an entire brand new data center most days. It may be a project, it may be, hey, I have a budget to redo my networking. I have a budget to redo my storage this year because every 3 years I get to redo storage. Every 5 years I get to redo it. So the only way to get from where we are now into that full software-defined data center, it's got to be a progression. It's going to be this piece, then this piece, then this piece, whatever it is. So it's not necessarily the Facebook model of I'm going to drop everything in at once. Yeah. It's how do you get that guy, those admins, and that level of knowledge, not at a CS level and everything, but at that level to know, here's how I do software-defined storage, possibly reusing some gear, lower budget, if I can reuse commodity gear, doing that, possibly on networking, can I just put a new management layer over top of what I have? That's the level they need to get to move it forward, not dropping a whole new data center in.
Yep.
So I guess it's a combination of things. I think you guys are saying the right things in terms of deciding, do I want to just mail it in and just put it on Amazon, or do I want my DevOps to be as good that they can sit and orchestrate and build it in-house. So I think it comes back again to the applications you're running, right? If you're running an Exchange, can you handle and run it inside? Do you want to run on Amazon, or do you run it inside and just scale your environment as you need? And that comes down to, I think, a few criteria. A, growing the DevOps talent. B, do I want to spend the money and do it in-house so I have full control? And C, why Amazon, yes or no? And oftentimes, I would say, like moving things to the cloud or storing inside, people say, oh, I have less management costs, or I'm cutting down my storage costs, so I'm going to put it on the cloud. But you're just moving, I would say, the bottleneck. Now you have a WAN that you have to spend money on.
Well, now
you get your data.
Now you've got latency.
Yeah, now you're introducing latency, and then you have a cost. Amazon doesn't just charge you for storage, it charges for what you're moving on and off constantly.
Hotel California. check in, you just can't get it out.
Exactly.
There you go. And then, so these are some of the issues you run into, and I think it really comes down to is, what are your goals for your applications? Do you want them managed in-house? Do you want to grow your DevOps talent? Or do you want to purchase something like from a Coho, a Nexenta, or SolidFire, or Simplivity, right? And do you want to trust the guy to manage it for you, so you have less overhead and you have someone who manages the storage, you can worry about architecting the data center versus actually spending time deploying the applications and fine-tuning things? I think it really comes down to what direction you want to go. And I know it sounds like a cop-out answer, but I think depends on each company.
I spent 30 years as a consultant. The answer to every question is it depends. Did you have a question, Tom?
Yes, we actually have a question from Tech Field Day delegate Ed Horley.
So I have a question for all of you, and answer at will, but I think there's at least in my mind's eye, there's not a good differentiation, at least in terms of how you're speaking to it, of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Because the reality is I think Dave Wright hit it right on the head. You're not building application service tiers the way Facebook and others are building it. I think the best move that any company can make in the enterprise, if you want to have get rid of your high availability constraints, I think Ivan Pepiniak said this, I want every single one of my enterprise customers to build applications for Amazon, because the moment that you can survive breakability in Amazon, and I don't need to buy all the high availability requirements in my enterprise environment anymore. And the reality is where things sit today, I see a big disconnect between those two. I know industry leaders see this, but the reality is for cloud consumption model, Amazon, Azure, Google, who are all doing it for real, SDDC, regardless of what Howard wants to say. I think the interesting part is, where do you fill the gap? Where do each one of your products fill the gap to get people from infrastructure service to the eventual platform as a service adoption, and then software as a service adoption, which is really where I see the industry going. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
So, I think that's a great point. And when people talk about the kind of breakability or the reliability characteristics of Amazon, they're mainly talking about the infrastructure as a service layer, and the fact that, yeah, things just can and do go away randomly. And the interesting thing is, I think as you go through the levels of infrastructure platforms, SaaS, the expectations go up, right? If you look at the platform layer of Amazon and their database services, or Google storage services, or Google's database services, those platform services hide all the jankiness of the underlying infrastructure and give you that reliability so that you can just write your application to that. But your application still has to deal with some of the funniness that comes there. And then if you go just use a SaaS application somewhere, your assumption is Salesforce or Box or Dropbox or whoever has figured out the reliability model, and that thing is just going to work. And obviously in the infrastructure level, you've got all ranges of expectations. You've got application frameworks that are designed to hide infrastructure instability. You've got things that just expect it to be rock solid. And really what we've focused on with our storage platform is being a good citizen and a solid building block for whatever level of reliability you want to enforce above that. Whether you want to do it at the application level, whether you want to do it at the platform level, or whether you want infrastructure that's super rock solid and reliable, which is what most enterprise applications expect today. But we can really kind of support all three of those different models.
I object to the question. and
we have another question also.
Yes, good. But my objection to the question is inherent in the question itself. That when you talk about infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, those are not technologies. They're go-to-market strategies. It's as a service. This is how I'm going to sell it, or how I'm going to provide it to the customers. And the truth is, IT departments do software as a service. We don't do infrastructure as a service. We don't do platform as a service. We deliver applications to users. And if you're talking about, I'm going to build a platform as a service data center, what you're really saying is, I'm not going to let any application that doesn't run on this platform run in my data center.
What was the question?
Right there. What was the question? How many enterprise groups are deploying Bitnami using Bitnami? How many folks even know what Bitnami is? That's the first question. So if you're an enterprise, and you're not consuming Bitnami, then your statement's absolutely false. I'll take you down on that one. You're not delivering software as a service. If you're not able to click a button to deploy any application suite that you want, if you're not using Chocolatey,
if you have a mailbox on an Exchange server that I manage, I am providing App Exchange to you, just like if I buy it from Intermedia. That's a software as a service.
Yeah,
You're saying I don't provide the software you want as a service, and frankly, I haven't even heard of the software you want, but that's another question.
So I'm talking about self-provisioning on the portal side, right? So, but the reality is I think there's absolutely a tier difference. Yeah. I think storage platform plays fit in the platform and infrastructure service play, absolutely. The software play is a different argument altogether, but I think it's really interesting about the cost model difference of what those big providers are doing. How does each one of the enterprise plays that you guys want to provide, where does it fill the gap, right? And why is that interesting for enterprises today? What's the interesting and compelling reason that they would use your platform versus consumption of a pure cloud play? And then what sort of integration are they going to get to move off of it? And those are the challenges that I see that are happening. The maturity model, how fast you develop, that's going to be true for the next 5 to 10 years as this stuff plays out. But the really interesting part is going to be how do you fit that need, and how do you actually allow people to move dynamically between those platform types they want to consume?
Go ahead.
We're doing that now. With part of it is some partnerships with companies to bring things in and out of cloud. Some of it is the ability, because we're open source based, so you have the availability to grab other applications and things that if you need data, you want it from something else, you pull it in from something else. Because we're ZFS backend, any ZFS thing you can pull it in and out of. We know that, so you're able to get that. And when it comes to price point, every one of our companies look at it and go, okay, how do I compete against Amazon? Because my CEO or my CIO went to some conference and looked at this and said, hey, Amazon can do it for this price. How come you can't as the IT shop? So now they're having to find those numbers. It's always about price point. I think for every one of us up here has to deal with that at some point on how do you compete against Amazon on doing that. And that's what allowed the service providers were a good example. They're all competing head to head, especially against the infrastructure as a service.
We need to make sure we separate wanting to, IT organizations wanting to go to Amazon and IT organizations wanting the benefits that they would get from going to Amazon, right? In my experience—
Not to mention IT organizations wanting to be Amazon.
Yeah, let's set that one aside for a minute. But we use Amazon as the poster child. Whatever the infrastructure is doesn't matter so much. I think that's an important differentiation, though, because in fact, if you play the whole large public cloud provider through to its logical conclusion, there is no IT organization. There's a handful of big clouds that run all of this infrastructure, and all these IT organizations get wiped out. I said earlier on a panel that no one ever loses their job as innovation happens. There's a tremendous amount of forces, a tremendous number of forces convincing people not to go to Amazon or name your cloud provider. In the case of the IT department, most likely would prefer to own this stuff and run it than to hand it off to someone, right? There's a lot of there's compliance, there's security, there's a lot of objective
phony
reasons.
Baloney job protection.
There's a lot of quantifiable reasons, and there's a lot of reasons that are just, listen, this is my infrastructure and I don't want it running in Amazon.
So I think,
but the key to making that happen is, can you provide the benefits that the user wants and the economics that the user's seeking, and give them that in their existing infrastructure? And I think the answer is you can. I mean, I think as a company, what we've found is that's exactly what we're responding to, right? The simplicity of these environments. And what we've also seen is when you walk the customer through the question of how do you add DR and high availability and protection across locations and all this stuff to Amazon, wait till you see your first bill that month, right? Don't compare to the one guy running a development instance in Amazon. Compare to highly available, redundant infrastructure, and that bill will be stunning the first month you see it.
Yeah, we did direct numbers and saw 60-70% cost reduction by staying in-house over 3-5 years. It's the long term. You look at it this month and it's cheaper to put it on Amazon potentially. So you look at it over 3 years, you got no chance of it being cheaper if you're actually using that data.
So if you're looking at one application.
Well, and if you're looking at the prices today, because remember, if it was 60% more yesterday, they just dropped their prices 60% today. So now it's at parity. You're good to go.
Right.
I do think it's about value and control. I mean, right, that's what it fundamentally comes down to. And I think IT organizations are constantly challenged to meet what Amazon can do in order to justify keeping it in-house, along with the organization's natural inclination to desire to control their future and their IT infrastructure.
And so I would add that it's more the executive's impression of what Amazon provides than what Amazon actually provides. I mean, my favorite example is, I spent years as a consultant and did a lot of exchange consulting. And I, several years ago, started recommending that my small business clients stop running their own servers and put it up in the cloud. And soon discovered that the corporate definition of backup and the software as a service provider's definition of backup are not the same thing. When a senior executive vice president deletes things from his mailbox, he calls the help desk and he expects the guy on the help desk to restore that from the backup. Google doesn't back up for that purpose. Google only backs up for the server crashed and I have to repair it. And so we have a disconnect between public cloud perception and public cloud reality as well. Yeah.
So my question was kind of going back to an earlier question. We're talking about the cloud. We're talking about writing to Amazon, writing apps for the Amazon cloud, so they're highly available, and that's great. And I agree new apps should be written that way. But
I disagree with that. But go ahead.
In the view that I see from the customers that I deal with, most of them have what we would term as legacy apps. Those were apps that were on physical servers, and maybe they've moved to a virtualized environment, but again, in the pets model instead of the cattle model. And those are the apps that are making them money right now. So do you see a transition to get those apps from the pets model to the cattle model, to get them from the traditional virtualization model to the cloud model without completely destroying and rewriting the apps? Or is that just going to be what it takes? It's just throw out the legacy apps that are making money now?
So, I want to go back to that because it was a point that the other delegate made that I think is common wisdom that may actually be wrong, which is the idea that enterprises should be writing their apps like a Google writes their apps, or like a Facebook, or like an Amazon writes their apps, where you expect the underlying infrastructure to fail. And wouldn't that be great? Because it would make my job as an IT guy a lot easier if the underlying infrastructure could just fall over at any time. But the reality is that, again, this goes back to the difference between the hyperscale guys and most enterprises. The hyperscale guys have a relatively small number of very large-scale applications that they need to run. And so it makes a lot of sense to invest a lot of time and effort in resiliency at the application layer because of the scale that they run those on and the fact that they can get smart people to write those applications. If you look at the typical enterprise, their problem isn't that they have just one or two core applications. It's they have hundreds or thousands of line of business applications that are all over the place.
Half of which they bought.
Some are packaged, some they built, some is like a VB6 app running somewhere. And as you say, those are not ready to and willing to run on the Amazon infrastructure at this point. The reality is it's probably not economical to rewrite them at this point. It's actually more economical to just run a reliable infrastructure, virtualize, package those up, keep them contained somewhere. But even if you look at new applications being built, I would say the vast majority, at least by number of applications that businesses are building at this point, they don't have the talent, they don't have the team, and quite frankly, they aren't important enough to invest at the application level for that level of resiliency. So having the option of putting those on a gold-plated infrastructure where they're going to be backed up, they're going to be replicated, there's going to be DR built into the infrastructure makes sense for those. Now, if you actually happen to have an enterprise application where because of the scale this thing runs at, it actually makes sense to invest a lot of time and effort on the application development side so that you can run it on throwaway infrastructure. That makes a lot of sense. But the reality is the vast majority of enterprise applications really don't require that level.
Do you spend $1 million on software development to save $500,000 on the infrastructure?
Exactly, because that's where their cost and complexity is.
I agree completely. If you look at the typical customer that has dozens, hundreds, thousands, depending on the size of the customer, applications that are homegrown, you can pay for additional development, complexity, testing, analysis, all the work to build in high availability and DR and replication and protection and backups into every single application you write as a business. Or you can invest in the infrastructure and make sure the infrastructure is resilient and able to provide those level of service. It's a no-brainer whether you invest in that 100 times or 1,000 times for every app, or whether you invest in it once for the infrastructure. And
so I mean, at that point, you're saying let the infrastructure do the work for you, versus putting that time into dev and DevOps.
Unless you have those outstanding apps, right? You mentioned if you're Gmail,
if it's going to cost you some large six-figure number to make the application sufficiently resilient that it will run on a crap infrastructure. Unless you're going to save some multiple of that because the good infrastructure was going to cost you a lot more than that, build a good infrastructure.
Right. You know you can buy the infrastructure tomorrow. You might lose that person tomorrow, right? I mean, the idea of building and reproducing this in every application, it just doesn't scale.
Well, no, you still probably have those COTS software too that can't do that.
Yeah, sure.
That you still have to buy the infrastructure to maintain it anyway.
Yep.
Right.
So you're buying it anyway.
And the other part is that consistency at Facebook is much less important. If my son posts some drunken picture of himself from a frat party,
you'd rather not be consistent.
Yeah. Well, if 12 of his friends open Facebook and only 11 of them see the latest picture, nobody cares.
That one guy does.
He doesn't know.
He can't comment on it anymore.
He doesn't know that it's, he'll see it tomorrow and he'll comment on it tomorrow. But if I go to my online banking and it says that I have money in the bank and I spend it and I didn't, then I'm going to be in trouble.
So I want to say that I think all of this reflects how real-world environments are messy.
Yes.
So you've got the enterprises with just a handful of apps that they can afford to rewrite to be resilient against crappy infrastructure. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have SMBs that have a junior admin that's about as far away from a PhD as you're going to get. And that's why they're moving to the cloud. And most of us fall somewhere in between, where we have a handful of apps that we can afford to optimize, and generally otherwise we need to optimize our infrastructure. But and that's why that's where we all come into it. I think. So I think software-defined stuff.
So I think that's right, but I think
it's got to be simple, and it's got to be high value, and it's got to be easily managed and fit into your infrastructure. I mean, certainly that's what we work on.
So I think one more thing to add to that, like it has to be easy to manage, fit into infrastructure, et cetera, so on. But I think more than anything else taking away is like you talk about the cloud, you talk about AWS, but do you really do the math on it? I think Mike brought that up, Jesse brought that up. Every exec CIO was like, woohoo, give me the cloud, let me go to it. And I have a pretty good example. My dad's a data warehouse architect at Visa, and they looked at AWS. He uses Hadoop. He has huge Hadoop deployments. We're talking about hundreds of petabytes. He went and bought his own gear, but Amazon was pitching pretty hard to him. And he has to have 3 copies of his data that's always available, always resilient. And he looked at the bill from Amazon versus the infrastructure. The bill from Amazon for 1 year was equal to the cost of the total infrastructure for him. That lasts 3 to 5 years. So we can say that's a no-brainer, but once again, it comes to the application. But more than that, what direction do you want to go in? Like, yeah, if you're SMB and you have a junior admin and you're like, screw it, AWS, but you got to do the homework on it. You can't just say, let me dump it off to AWS and everything is going to be done.
If you're an SMB and you've got that junior admin, it's not AWS. It's Gmail.
It's Google Apps.
It's not. You're not buying infrastructure.
In fact, you're probably buying from your local MSP.
Or Office 365 or something like that.
I think the next question is
one thing I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in the noise here is that you shouldn't equate the software-defined data center with an Amazon-style, anything can fail, unreliable data center. They're not the same thing. Right? Amazon clearly uses software-defined data center capabilities in their data center, but they use it to a certain end, and their end is particularly optimized around cost. You can use the same set of capabilities to a very different end, which is around reliability, which is around agility, which is around any number of different things that you're trying to optimize for. And that's really the key advantage here, is that in software, you can change those things. I can change my replication level. I can change my SLAs on the the resources that are available to this application in software. I don't actually have to build up a physical infrastructure stack with, I use this storage platform for this set of SLAs and this storage platform and other SLAs, and I use this type of networking here and this type of networking here.
And if we add layers like OpenStack and Puppet, then we can replace the parts and keep the same set of definitions.
Yeah. Potentially, yes. But the point is, really, it's about moving to an infrastructure that works for what you need and allows you to move to a platform approach to your infrastructure, as opposed to just this kind of silos of, I custom designed it for this set of workloads, and that's all it can run.
So I think the one pertaining to the platform as a service, that's something I think Andy and our team really strive to do. I mean, they really believe in, like, you can deploy anything regardless of the protocol. It just should work regardless of what you're putting on our infrastructure. We should be able to handle it and deliver it to you as you want, with quality of service through the stack. And I think that's one thing every storage vendor here we can say is that's our goal, right? We want to deliver performance to your application based on the application, what kind of policies you pertain around it. I think that's something Amazon or cloud or anything, someone you hand off to, you're kind of giving that responsibility away. And I think it's up to you if you want to maintain that and hold on to it because you know your infrastructure better or someone else does.
Okay. Justin, did you have a question?
Kind of, yeah. So following on from most of that discussion, and I liked when you pointed out doing your homework, but that's one of the things that, as Victoria mentioned, it's complicated and messy. Doing your homework is hard, and as we discussed earlier at the panel, actually understanding what your costs are is hard. So you've got people who are trying to make decisions about, should I move this application, should I rewrite it, should I do this, will it save me money? How would you even know?
Just probably no.
So you hire Howard.
Yeah,
no, I don't do that anymore.
You're right. You're right.
I'm just a pundit.
It is very
now.
difficult to try and figure that out, right? And I think
but we had a lot of people here making assertions about, oh, that's a no-brainer, and I challenge that. I would say there is very little here that is a no-brainer, and a lot of people, I think, are making decisions using their gut.
So I mean, when you purchase,
aren't actually necessarily the right thing to do because they didn't do their homework.
So I mean, when you end up talking to architects, right? And they're sitting there and saying, hey, I want to deploy this type of storage infrastructure. They do their homework with you, I would say, to some extent. They ask you, how much does it cost for X price? But at some point there, what are your switch costs? How many servers am I going to deploy on this? And they're thinking through this entire architecture. And I think you need to ask them, as a vendor, what do you care about? Do you care about DR? Do you care about resiliency? Do you care about performance? Right? And talking to early customers, they often say, I care about management. I don't want to sit and worry about how to deploy my apps. I want to set it and forget it. Or I care about performance. Or I care about scalability. And I think they do their homework, but I think it's also a vendor's job to walk them through that step, to make sure they realize, hey, these are the pitfalls, right? They may not buy from you, but I think if you educate them, I'm guaranteed they'll come back and trust you, even if it costs them more, because the fact they're very open, and you're going through the steps with them saying, these are things you need to worry about. This is where Amazon does beat us, but this is what you get in return with going with us versus an Amazon. And I think an educated sales team will do that, and I think an educated marketing team will do that, and a product team. And I think it falls on the vendor's shoulders to an extent to do some of that homework for them. I agree with you in that sense.
Or possibly the channel.
We've drifted somewhere from software-defined into comparing internal infrastructure into cloud, right?
Well, I think we should just treat it the way we do with everything else. We spend money, and one line item is less than it used to be, and we say that every person in the company saves 20 seconds a day, and we multiply that by the payroll, and we say we saved a lot on TCO. I mean, that's the Gartner method, isn't it?
I did want to make one comment, though, about Amazon, because we keep coming back to it. I'll make two comments. The first is, I've spent more time talking about Amazon today than I have with customers in probably the last 6 months. Customers are far less obsessed with the cloud than everyone.
Well, by the time they're talking to you, they've already decided they're going to build an infrastructure.
You can make that argument, but I talked to a lot of customers early in the process as well. Yeah. The other aspect is, I think where Amazon or any cloud provider, it becomes almost impossible to compete with if you are the infrastructure company, is in their ability to respond to varying demand, right? So if you some days need one web server, and on some days you need 1,000 web servers, that is where the cloud wins. Yeah, hands down, right? You said no.
There's that elasticity that's based on the fact that they have scale and are serving 5,000 customers.
The spike, because I have a friend who runs IT for a company that put a large ad on a NASCAR race vehicle. They put a lot of extra web servers online, and they saw an enormous spike. If he had to have that infrastructure, would have made no sense. But to put it in the cloud for the 5 days that he did is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I ran for a cloud for a while, a small cloud for service provider. We had that. If something hits Drudge, the spike on your web traffic is like 140-fold, instantly.
One thing that would make this panel better is if there was a representative from Amazon on it.
I've never met my sales rep.
We'll put that down for the next time.
Well,
yeah, we know some people who used to be seriously involved there.
Objective.
I think we got one more question for this panel.
Excellent.
Hi. So it seems to me that this at core is really just a scalability question. There are solution designs which work at the very large scales for the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, and so on. And if you're going to do a solution design for an SMB, it's going to be a different stack. And that's going to continue all the way down. And then what SDDC is doing in this space is really taking the solution sets for the larger scale operations and helping them to apply further down the scaling stack. It's really about that bleed down, if you want, from the PhDs down and down the food chain to the smaller and smaller spaces.
I think that's a piece of it, but again, I would argue that there is a dividing line below which SDDC or not, it doesn't make sense to be running your own infrastructure anyway. So I think to the extent that you are at a scale where it makes sense to run your own infrastructure, yeah, I mean, it's about taking some of these software-defined methodologies that have been pioneered by some of the larger guys and bringing them down to a wider range of more general-purpose service provider and data center environments. But I don't think it follows all the way down to the SMB level because, again, at that level, either your infrastructure is so simple that it just doesn't take much management to begin with, or you probably shouldn't be running your infrastructure anyway.
I think that's where you really do need to do the math, though. I think it's too easy to say it should run in the cloud.
I, for one, have dealt with too paranoid SMBs.
Yeah, there's a lot of SMBs where the economics favor running their own infrastructure over running in the cloud.
Really, anybody with a budget needs to do their own math.
What's that?
That's a constant. Anybody with a budget needs to do their own math.
My point was
it's not as simple as math.
Yeah, exactly.
To say that the SMB is all going to end up in the cloud is an oversimplification of the problem, right? And I think that there are solutions that allow those customers to run their infrastructure. I think the only thing that about your comment I would add to is it's about the application as well, right? So when we talk about building in something into Gmail as an application versus building it into a homegrown application that has a very different scale and different metrics, but I think the number of folks with a budget, as you say, that do all the math is not what one might hope, right? And I think this is where
gut feel out there.
The other side is also
we did the full analysis on running a real production VM in a nameless cloud provider that had all the expectations of what you would get from your existing infrastructure, right? Hourly backups, replicate it to a remote data center, the ability to go online in that remote data center, all those things that we expect when we talk about DR and high availability and things like that. And the numbers come out much, much higher than one would initially expect, at least from the
Totally
analysis
agreed, totally understood. I write those checks every month. But on the other hand, let's admit that this, as we said earlier, especially in terms of pricing models, this is a growing arena. Right now, the Amazons, the Googles, the Azures, and so on, they have an enormous scale of operations, they have economies of scales, and they can sell a product at a premium because no one else is. Mm-hmm. But that is bleeding down. We now have the not so big providers and the OpenStacks and the Rackspaces and so on who are doing the same thing.
Well, Rackspace, for one, has publicly said we are not chasing that price down. Whether they'll be able to maintain that position in the long run or not is an open question.
So,
but
I much prefer to actually, in that sort of level, to look at what the numbers say than what the press releases say. Because the numbers are actually what goes on the check.
Yeah, unfortunately, those are always the numbers with real customers, not the numbers that they'll talk to people like me about.
And they're negotiated as well.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's going to come down. We can expect the cloud pricing to continue to fall. Sure. Because at the end of the day, it is SDDC plus the fact that they're operating at scale. That is the only thing they're really selling.
Well, I somewhat disagree on that. You're going to see prices drop not just for the cloud, but your price should be dropping too. If you're looking at, you look at virtualization, you're buying commodity gear. If you're on a storage solution, use commodity gear, you're buying commodity gear. That price should continually drop because they're competing against each other.
The price of everything but software and services in the IT business falls 15 to 20% a year.
Yeah, people
every
get more
year,
expensive.
As long as I've been in the
cheaper.
business.
Mm-hmm. Totally agreed.
Well, and the whole idea on software-defined storage is that you can use commodity hardware that should lower the cost. And you mentioned scalability. So you were talking about scale coming down, but you can reverse it as well to say that with one of the things we do is enable people to start very, very small and scale up. And it's a leverage of resources that's much more cost efficient. Over lunch, we were talking with some people about this concept of persistent storage instead of having to do those upgrades every 3 years, right? So now you have persistent commodity-based storage that can scale easily over time as you need, because it's managed by the software. So, I mean, that's the dream of it. And ideally, it starts to bring the economics that, you know, an Amazon can enjoy down to your average data center.
Yeah, if you look at the cost of people, I mean, one of the analysis we've done with a number of customers is we can debate whether it's software defined or not. It's solving the customer problem, which is the way we look at it. When we define policy to protect a VM between data center 1 and data center 2, we point at data center 2, not at LUNs, controllers, IPs, shares, none of the underlying plumbing. And that allows the solution that you were talking about, right, which is the ability to go into that data center 3 years from now, upgrade it without ever taking anything offline, without ever changing any policy, without ever understanding the underlying infrastructure. And when you look, what we've seen in TCOs with customers is that the elimination of that tech refresh complexity, risk, and cost completely flips the ownership.
So our closing statement is abstraction good?
Abstraction good.
Abstraction good. Hey, so I just wanted to allude to something that you said. So there's this thing called Bezos' Law floating around. Have you seen this? Cost of compute goes down 50% every 3 years. Mm-hmm. Like that. So if that trend continues and it's isolated to cloud, that will make a difference. The other, well, we don't know, right? I mean, you know, Moore's Law is not a law, but it holds because we have time. We haven't seen this over time, right? The other thing I wanted to mention to you is you said it was all about scaling, and it is a lot about scaling, but it's also about evolvability. So, you know, eventually you're going to want to field new services in your enterprise, or even in your infrastructure as a service. You know, so that infrastructure itself needs to be built to evolve, because it's not, you know, even if it was perfect by some standard, it's going to change over time. So I think evolvability and scalability kind of go hand in hand. If you build something that's scalable and not evolvable, eventually it will bite you, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you build the Titanic, it will sink.
I will trust you on that.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our allotted time. Thank you. To quote the great Andy Kaufman, thank you very much.